and is very disturbing, as a young woman was set ablaze and tried to put herself out while other passengers got out of the way or watched.
The woman who was attacked is still in critical condition. The U.S. Attorney's Office says this federal charge carries a punishment of a life sentence.
Because of the swift action of CPD, ATF, and our law enforcement partners, there will be no other chances for Mr. Reed. Thank you.
How many chances does a person get before we say enough is enough? 10? 20? How about 72? Yeah, you heard me right. 72 arrests. And somehow this man was still walking the streets of Chicago, still riding the train, still carrying gasoline in a bottle. Let me tell you something about Lawrence Reed. In August 2025, this man knocked a social worker unconscious in a hospital, slapped her so hard she blacked out, chipped her tooth, damaged her eye. Prosecutors looked at a judge and said, "Do not let this man out. Electronic monitoring is not enough." You know what that judge said? She let him go anyway.
So to me, a fine of $354, which is our normal no insurance fine, that's a lot of money. And some of the judges that I work with came from money, so $354 is no big deal. But to most of the people that come to my courtroom, it is a big deal. And so I always offer them the opportunity to do community service. You know, being a Latina in the office, people would tell me, like, don't you feel like you're prosecuting your own people? But it's true. There were a lot of, defendants that look like me. However, I had a chance as a prosecutor to make a difference as to what cases come in. I had a chance as a prosecutor to decide what offers were appropriate. And so I always offer them the opportunity to do community service.
3 months later, on November 18, 2025, Lawrence Reed walked up to a 26-year-old woman on a CTA train, doused her in gasoline, and set her on fire. Just poured it on her and lit a match. She was just sitting there, on her phone, like any of us would be. The woman's name is Bethany Magee, and as I'm telling you this story, she's in a hospital fighting for her life. Make it make sense. Because I'm about to tell you a story that's going to have you asking one question. Who was really being protected here? Lawrence Reed, 50 years old. And girl, where do I even start with this man? We're talking about someone with a criminal record that goes back to the mid-90s. Drug charges, domestic battery, criminal damage to property, battery charges for punching women in the face. The list goes on and on. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just some petty criminal. This man had a pattern. In 2020, Reed walked up to the Thompson Center, that's a government building in downtown Chicago, poured liquid from 2 red cans near the window, and set a fire. An actual fire at a government building. You know what happened to him? Probation. That's it. No jail time, just probation. And throughout all of this, Reed had been dealing with mental health issues for 26 years. He'd been in and out of psychiatric facilities, on and off medications, cycling through the system like a revolving door. McNeil Hospital had been treating him for 17 years. 17 years they knew this man. But here's where it gets real. Here's where we need to pay attention. August 19th, 2025, McNeil Hospital, psychiatric ward. Reed is inside the locked ward and a social worker is just doing her job, talking to him. The surveillance video shows everything. 1 minute they're talking. The next minute, Reed just snaps. He becomes irate and slaps this woman in the face with an open palm. Not a little slap. We're talking about a hit so hard that her vision went black and she lost consciousness for several seconds. Let that sink in. He knocked her out. Her coworker had to rush over and help her walk down to her office. They took her to the emergency room. The damage? A cut on the cornea of her eye. Possible optic nerve bruising. A concussion that caused nausea and memory loss. A chipped tooth. And these weren't just immediate. Injuries. She was still dealing with side effects on a daily basis. So 3 days later, August 22nd, Reed is standing in front of Judge Teresa Molina Gonzalez at a Maywood courthouse. Prosecutor Geraldine Gamila stands up and lays it all out. She tells the judge about the attack. She goes through Reed's extensive criminal history, all those arrests, all those chances he'd already gotten. She talks about that 2020 arson conviction. And then she says something that's about to be real important. The defendant poses a real and present threat to the safety of, especially this victim, whoever else was working in the hospital that day, and the community as a whole. The defendant randomly and spontaneously became irate in this situation, where the victim was just attempting to do her job as a social worker, and now as a result, suffered injuries so severe that she still has side effects on a daily basis. She's basically begging the judge, do not let this man back on the streets. Electronic monitoring? That's not enough. It could not protect the victim or the community from another vicious, random, and spontaneous attacks, Gumila told the judge. Girl, she was trying to protect the next victim, the one that hadn't been hurt yet. But Reed's public defender, Nicholas Yannius, had a different story. He stood up and said Reed had been struggling with mental illness for 26 years, that he gets paranoid, that he'd been treated at that same hospital for 17 years, and that he'd gotten back on the correct dose of his medications since the assault. Mr. Reed needs services. He does not need to be incarcerated for being mentally ill and acting in accordance with his mental illness, the lawyer said. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. Because yes, mental health is real. Yes, people need treatment. Yes, the system fails people with mental illness every single day. But here's what we're also going to acknowledge. The prosecutor wasn't saying lock him up and throw away the key. She was saying this man is dangerous, and electronic monitoring cannot protect the public from what he might do next. You know what Judge Melina Gonzalez said? I understand your position, but I can't keep everybody in jail because the state's attorney wants me to. But I understand and respect your position. And then she let him go. Electronic monitoring. Stay away from the hospital unless there's a medical emergency. But here's the part that should make your blood boil. Under Illinois law, defendants with electronic monitoring are supposed to get 16 hours a week outside their home for essential activities. You know how many hours Judge Melina Gonzalez gave Lawrence Reed? 40 hours a week. That's 24 more hours than the standard. Oh, so now we're just giving violent offenders extra freedom? But wait, it gets worse. September 12th, 2025. A few weeks later, Reed's lawyer goes before a different judge, Judge Ralph Mexick, and asks if Reed can have different hours so he can be able to do church activities. And Judge Mexick said, yes. So now Lawrence Reed, the man who just knocked a social worker unconscious, the man with 72 arrests, the man who set a fire at a government building, is walking around Chicago with more freedom than most people on electronic monitoring, going to church, living his life. September 17th, the charge against Reed for that hospital assault gets upgraded to felony aggravated battery. He pleads not guilty. And then, nothing. Life goes on. Reed is out there, supposedly following his curfew, supposedly staying out of trouble. Except he wasn't. Court records show that in November, Reed violated his curfew 6 times. November 9th, November 12th, November 13th, November 14th, November 15th. On some of those days, there was an escalated alert, meaning the system knew something was off. And you know when the adult probation department finally filed those curfew violations? November 19th, 2 days after he set Bethany Magee on fire. Let me say that again. They waited until after the attack to do anything about the violations. Period. Monday, November 18th, 2025. Around 9 p.m., Lawrence Reed walks into a Citgo gas station. The surveillance cameras are rolling. He's carrying a bottle and he walks straight to the pump. Fills that bottle with gasoline, just casual. Like he's getting a coffee. Nobody stops him. Nobody questions it. He pays and leaves. Now, I don't know what was going through his mind at that moment. I don't know if he woke up that morning planning this, or if something snapped along the way. But what I do know is that he walked out of that gas station with a bottle full of gasoline, and he got on a CTA Blue Line train. Bethany Magee is already on that train, 26 years old. She's heading northbound, approaching the Clark and Lake subway stop in the Loop. She's sitting down, scrolling through her phone, reading something, maybe texting a friend, maybe checking social media, just existing, just trying to get wherever she's going. She has no idea what's about to happen. The train is moving. Other passengers are scattered around the car, some sitting, some standing, everybody in their own world. And then Lawrence Reed approaches her. There's no argument, There's no altercation. There's no back and forth. Some reports tried to say there was some kind of disagreement, that maybe they knew each other, that maybe something was said. Federal prosecutors made it clear. That's false. Completely false. Bethany was on her phone, minding her own business, and Reed just walks up to her and starts pouring gasoline on her. Can you imagine? You're sitting there and suddenly you feel liquid hitting you. Smell that sharp gasoline smell, and before your brain can even process what's happening, you see the flame. Reed pulls out a lighter, a small bottle, probably the same one with gas in it, and he ignites it. Bethany Magee is on fire. The surveillance video, and prosecutors say it's difficult to watch, that it's disturbing, shows this young woman set ablaze, flames covering her body, and she's trying to run, trying to get away, but girl, where do you go? You're on a moving train. She drops to the ground and starts rolling, desperately trying to put out the flames, rolling back and forth on that train floor. And the fire is just eating at her skin, her clothes, everything. And you know what the other passengers did? They got out of the way. They watched. Some of them moved to the other end of the car. Some of them just stood there, frozen. Nobody came to help. Nobody threw their jacket on her. Nobody tried to smother the flames. They just watched her burn. For almost a full minute, Bethany Magee was on fire. 60 seconds. Count that out in your head right now. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Keep going until you hit 60. That's how long this woman was burning while people just looked at her. The train finally stops. The doors open. And somehow, Bethany finds the strength to get up. She's still on fire, still burning, and she stumbles off that train onto the platform at Clark and Lake Station. Only then do two good Samaritans, finally rush over and put out the flames. But the damage? Girl, the damage was already done. Bethany Magee is rushed to the hospital in critical condition, burns covering her body. The kind of injuries that I can't even imagine. The kind of pain that's beyond words. And as of right now, she's still in that hospital. Still fighting, still holding on. Here's what I'll say about the Chicago Police Department, the ATF, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. They moved fast. The attack happened Monday night around 9 p.m. By Tuesday afternoon, Lawrence Reed was in custody. How'd they find him? The man had burn injuries. He burned himself while trying to burn Bethany. So when they picked him up downtown on Tuesday, it wasn't hard to put two and two together. But they didn't just rely on that. They had the surveillance video from the Citgo station showing Reed filling up that bottle with gasoline. They had the CTA train surveillance showing the entire attack from multiple angles. They had witnesses. They had evidence from the scene. The ATF, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, got involved because this involved fire. And they have a whole unit that deals with arson and explosives. They sent the evidence to their national laboratory in Maryland for processing. And the U.S. Attorney's Office? They worked through the night. From Monday night when it happened to Wednesday morning, they gathered everything they needed to bring federal charges.
At approximately 9 p.m. The victim was riding northbound, approaching the Clark and Lake subway stop in the Loop, minding her own business and reading her phone, when the defendant doused her with gasoline and lit her on fire. The surveillance video is difficult to watch and is very disturbing, as a young woman was set ablaze and tried to put herself out while other passengers got out of the way or watched. When the train stopped and the victim was able to muster the strength to stumble on the platform, two good Samaritans put out the flames. She remains in critical condition, and we pray for the victim's recovery. Mr. Reed is charged with committing a terrorist attack against the mass transportation system, specifically the CTA, which, as most of you know, I have declared to be a part of the Project Safe Neighborhood Zone. Once our office became aware of this incident and the defendant's identity, our team and our law enforcement partners, particularly ATF and the Chicago Police Department, worked through the night to gather the evidence and help us bring swiftly the charge that we filed with the court late this morning. I'd like to thank Special Agent Chris Ammon with the ATF and his agents, as well as Superintendent Snelling and the Chicago Police Department and the Chicago Transit Authority for their incredible work and their assistance in this investigation. We will advise the court about this defendant and his criminal history and other such matters at the upcoming detention hearing, which will be this Friday at 10 a.m. in Judge McNally's courtroom. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to ATF Special Agent in Charge, Chris Ammon. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Chris Ammon. I'm the Special Agent in Charge with the ATF Chicago Field Division. As the U.S. Attorney mentioned, on Monday night, a horrific act of violence occurred aboard a CTA train at Clark and Lake. A 26-year-old woman was deliberately set on fire by Lawrence Reed in an unprovoked attack. The victim in this case is in critical condition, and our prayers are with her, her family, and everyone who is affected by this unimaginable tragedy. As the charges make clear today, violence of any kind on the CTA rail system or in our city is unacceptable and will continue to be met with the full force of the ATF, our law enforcement partners, and the United States Attorney's Office. I want to thank U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros for his leadership and commitment to seeking justice in this case. I'd also like to extend my sincere appreciation to the Chicago Police Department and their investigative response team, their bomb and arson unit. ATF has a strong and proud partnership with the Chicago Police Department. CPD officers responded quickly to secure the scene, tend to the victim, process evidence, and then approximately 12 hours later detain Reed so that federal charges could be brought in this case. The evidence in this case will be processed and examined at the ATF National Laboratory in Maryland. Finally, let me say this. Lawrence Reed had no business being on the streets given his violent criminal history and his pending criminal cases. Reed had plenty of second chances by the criminal justice system, and as a result, you have an innocent victim in the hospital fighting for her life. Because of the swift action of CPD, ATF, and our law enforcement partners, there will be no other chances for Mr. Reed. Thank you.
Let me tell you something. That right there, that's somebody saying what everybody in Chicago was already thinking. This man had 72 arrests. He'd just been charged with knocking a social worker unconscious. He'd violated his curfew 6 times. He had an arson conviction from 2020. And he was still out there, still free, still able to buy gasoline and get on a train. During the press conference, reporters asked questions. One asked about the video, whether there was an altercation. Pasquale shut that down. Quick.
In terms of the video evidence, obviously I want to stick to what's in the complaint itself, but we've watched the video and different angles of the video, and what we could say is this young woman was on her phone, going through her phone, minding her business, when Mr. Reed approached her and began throwing gasoline on her. And the video, if it does become public, which I suspect it will at some point, you'll be able to see exactly what occurred, but she was literally sitting down. I've seen reports that there was an altercation or that there was some kind of disagreement or argument that took place. Those statements are inaccurate and false. She was on her phone.
Can you talk about the fact that people on the train did not sense what was the video shows that you expressed that, but talk about what that says in your opinion, sir.
I don't want to share what it says in my opinion, other than the video evidence will speak for itself. There were other people who were on the train, other people who saw what was occurring, and I can appreciate that. I'm sure people were afraid. I'm sure that people did not want to get involved. Perhaps people were afraid to get involved. But what we could say is, even as she was on the ground trying to put herself out and is rolling on the ground, desperately trying to put out the fire, no one came to her aid until she was able to get off the train and to the platform. And when she finally stumbled down, 2 Samaritans came and put out all the blaze that was all consuming her.
He didn't say it outright, but you could feel what he wasn't saying. Where was the humanity? Where was the compassion? How do you watch someone burn and do nothing? But hey, that's where we are. Friday, November 22nd, 2025. federal courthouse in Chicago. Lawrence Reed stands before a federal judge for his detention hearing. And girl, what happens next is something you cannot make up. Reed tells the judge he wants to represent himself. No lawyer. He's going to handle his own defense. The judge asks him if he understands what he's charged with, if he understands the seriousness of this. Reed says yes. Then the judge asks the big question. Should you be held in custody while awaiting trial, or should you be released? And Lawrence Reed, the man with 72 arrests, the man who just set a woman on fire, says this. I agree of me being detained. It's for my safety. I agree with detention for my safety. I don't feel safe out there. Let me repeat that. I don't feel safe out there. The irony, the absolute irony of this man saying he doesn't feel safe when Bethany Magee is in a hospital bed fighting for her life because of what he did. When every person who rides the CTA is now looking over their shoulder because of what he did. But you know what? At least he's being honest. At least he's acknowledging what everybody else already knew. He's dangerous. He knows he's dangerous. Even he doesn't trust himself to be out in society. The judge orders him to undergo a medical and mental evaluation, tells him he needs to cooperate with that. And just like that, Lawrence Reed is remanded into federal custody. The charge he's facing? Committing a terrorist attack against a mass transportation system. If convicted, he's looking at life in prison. And if Bethany doesn't make it, and Lord, we're praying she does, this becomes a death penalty case. Now here's what's interesting. During all of this, information starts coming out about just how badly the system failed. Remember those curfew violations? The ones from November 9th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and the 18th? The Cook County Adult Probation Department knew about those violations. They had the data. The electronic monitoring system was sending alerts, escalated alerts, on some of those days. But nobody did anything. Nobody filed a violation report. Nobody went to pick him up. Nobody told the judges, hey, this man you released, he's not following the rules. It wasn't until November 19th, 2 days after Bethany was set on fire, that they finally filed those violations with the court. 2 days after. Make it make sense. So let's talk about accountability, because that's what this really comes down to. Lawrence Reed is in custody now. He's facing federal charges. He's looking at life in prison. That's good. That's justice starting to work. But that's not the whole story, is it? Judge Teresa Molina Gonzalez released Lawrence Reed on August 22nd, despite a prosecutor standing in her courtroom and telling her that electronic monitoring was wholly insufficient, that it could not protect the victim or the community from another vicious, random, and spontaneous attacks. She gave him 40 hours a week of freedom, 24 more hours than the standard, even though he had 72 prior arrests and an arson conviction. Judge Ralph Mexick expanded Reed's freedom even more in September so he could do church activities. The Cook County Adult Probation Department had 6 curfew violations on record in November and did nothing until after a woman was set on fire. These are the people who had the power to stop this. These are the people who had the information. These are the people who were warned, and they did nothing. Now, I'm not saying they lit that match. I'm not saying they poured that gasoline. Lawrence Reed did that. He made that choice. He walked into that gas station, got on that train, and decided to destroy someone's life. That's on him. But what I am saying is that Bethany Magee should have never been on that train with Lawrence Reed. He should have been in custody. He should have been in a facility getting the mental health treatment he clearly needed. He should have been anywhere, but free to walk the streets of Chicago with a bottle of gasoline. Prosecutor Geraldine Gamila tried to tell them. She stood in that courtroom in August and laid out exactly why Reed was a threat. She described how he randomly and spontaneously became violent. She talked about the social worker's injuries, the cut cornea, the possible optic nerve damage, the concussion, the chipped tooth. She said he posed a real and present threat to the safety of, especially this victim, whoever else was working in the hospital that day, and the community as a whole. And Judge Molina Gonzalez said, I understand your position, but I can't keep everybody in jail because the state's attorney wants me to. But see, that's the thing. They weren't asking her to keep everybody in jail. They were asking her to keep this man, this specific man with his specific history, behind bars. And she said no. A spokesperson for the Office of the Chief Judge at the Cook County Circuit Court said judges can't comment on pending cases. So we won't be hearing from Judge Molina Gonzalez about why she made the decision she made. We won't be hearing from Judge Metzick about why he thought it was a good idea to give Reed more hours for church. But we don't need to hear from them. Their decisions speak for themselves. This case isn't just about Lawrence Reed. It's about a system that keeps giving violent offenders chance after chance after chance, even when prosecutors are begging for them to stop. It's about a system that values the rights of people who've proven they're dangerous over the safety of people just trying to live their lives. It's about a system that let a man with 72 arrests walk free because he needs services, not incarceration. And you know what? Maybe he did need services. Maybe he needed intensive mental health treatment. Maybe he needed to be in a secure facility where he could get help and the public could be protected. But what he got instead was an ankle monitor and 40 hours a week to roam Chicago. And Bethany Magee paid the price. As I'm recording this, Bethany is still in the hospital, still in critical condition, still fighting, and I want you to think about what her life looks like now. The burns, the pain, the surgeries she's probably going to need, the scars, physical and emotional, that she's going to carry for the rest of her life. The trauma of being set on fire while strangers watched and did nothing. She was 26 years old, just sitting on a train, reading her phone, going about her life, and in 1 minute, everything changed. This is what happens when the system fails. Not just fails, refuses to act even when the danger is right in front of their faces. Lawrence Reed told the judge, "I don't feel safe out there." He knew he was a danger. Even he knew it. The question is, why didn't the people who had the power to stop him know it too? Or did they know and just not care? I said what I said.